It all begins in a fancy bar, where we see Tiana talking on the phone with a rather mysterious man. The man asks her what she's doing there, and she tells her, without any fuss, that he's going to be in the opening scene of the movie. The guy says that to make it easier for the audience and avoid having to keep going, reading subtitles. He preferred to call her directly in English. But Tiana immediately clarifies that she's not just any girl from Jersey, but was born and raised with all the attitude in Harlem. As she leaves the restaurant, she turns into a dark, smoky alley. And that's where the stalker throws out the classic question, "What's your favorite movie? Favorite horror?" Tiana replies that she's not a big fan of those filters because the same white girl always survives in the end. Since everyone knows she's very, it's hard to kill a sister. At that moment, Ghostface appears, stalking her from behind with a knife in his hand. But what the killer never would have expected was that Tiana wasn't alone, but had brought her entire Harlem gang with her. Confident, the assassin, she lunges at him with a knife from behind, but the blade ricochets off Tiana's steely abs. Seeing that her attack failed miserably, the entire gang corners Ghostface and gives him a monumental beating on the ground with bats and kicks. In the end, a Ghostface completely wrecked and with his mask dented, he tries to have the last word and tells her that he may have kicked his ass, but still she'll never win an Oscar. Tiana simply turns around with tremendous superiority and tells him off by saying he's right. This being the end of a horror franchise in this universe. It is at that moment when Martina, Cindy's daughter, receives the dreaded call from Ghost. Face, the killer, appears on the scene, attacks her with everything he's got, and makes it clear that after several years of absence, he's back in the neighborhood. So it's best to tread carefully. In the parking lot of an amusement park with the subtle name of Final Destination, where we see the classic A Red Roller Coaster in the background, a guy comes out celebrating euphorically that he managed to survive thanks to his lucky coin. But as fate in these movies has no patience, a giant sign suddenly falls on him and completely crushes him. Right after, the action shifts to another part of the parking lot, where Sarah reunites with her boyfriend. At that moment, she receives a call informing her Ghostface just attacked her sister, and while she panics and her boyfriend looks suspicious, we finally arrive at a cabin in the middle of the woods, in what looks like Laurie Strode's heavily fortified bunker, surrounded by cameras and barbed wire fences. A mother completely paranoid and armed to the teeth, she opens a door with about 50 exaggerated locks, making it clear that if the killer plans to enter, she's going to have a pretty tough time there. This woman's real problem is that her relationship with her daughters is terrible, mainly because she hates seeing them happy people. Cindy is convinced that the maniac has returned with the sole purpose of eliminating her, and she strongly suspects that Sarah's boyfriend is the new face behind the mask. Reminiscing about old times, we learn that Cindy once took her daughter to meet Santa Claus, only to find that the chosen one was none other than Art. Terry Fair's clown act ended up giving away mutilated body parts to those present, which traumatized the daughter. On the other hand, that same Sunday, Brenda was waiting for Ray at church. When he arrived, the priest, aware of his sins, he asked her to come closer, exclaiming, "May the hand of God come and manifest itself in my hands in the name of the Father and the Son." After, Ray firmly asserts that he has left his homosexuality behind through this particular ritual. Now he proclaims that he loves women and that he will abandon his taste for white, Chinese, Latino, brown men, and men of any imaginable ethnicity. Later, Sarah goes to the hospital to visit her sister Martina. The girl is still very confused by the attack, and right after stealing some morphine-induced, Sarah decides to take some pills to cope with the maternal trauma Cindy causes her. At that precise moment, Ghostface bursts into the room. After an intense fight, Sarah begs the nurses for help, but since they are on their lunch break, they warn her that she will have to wait. They finish eating. When she's finally attended to, the nurse hits her with a tray. As things return to normal, Sarah's boyfriend appears mysteriously. His face was covered in wounds, excusing himself by saying he had fallen because he was clumsy. The action shifts to the school with a group of friends. They are extremely worried about Martina's health. However, Shorty immediately appears to calm the situation, asking them not to make a fuss. Unnecessary drama, and they completely ignore the issue. It's at this precise moment that the film takes a ridiculous turn. It turns out that Shorty is a fossil student who holds the impressive record of repeating the same grade for 26 years. Although Shorty's real business now is in the digital world, where she spends her time live streaming and playing Fortnite, Sarah and her boyfriend are looking for answers and will consult people. Superhuman Doofy. They find him completely isolated and paranoid, living under the belief that the pandemic is still active. After making them try it and see that they overcome it, the boyfriend explains that COVID is already a thing of the past and that there is even a cure. This unleashes Doofy's fury, who, seeing that it accumulated mountains of provisions for nothing, gives him all the food, kicks him off his property, and warns him the killer could very well be Sarah's own boyfriend. Although she vouches for him, Duffy reconsiders, leaves his retirement, and goes to reunite with his old friends. Meanwhile, the group gathers at Brenda's house, who asks them to call her Ma, introducing herself as a very responsible lady who is fascinated. Cindy arrives at the location and spends time with minors and buys them beer in a clear parody of the Octavia Spencer film. Brenda is happy to see her, but Cindy apologizes for not hugging her because she considers herself racist. Brenda doesn't care at all, assuring her that she's always known. After discussing the situation, they all conclude that Ghostface's true target is Cindy. Sarah is annoyed by the attention, but Brenda claims that if the killer dares to appear, she's ready to receive him. Unfortunately, a shot goes off accidentally, and they kill an extra to solve the problem. They quickly bury him, and on the tombstone, they simply write, "Random person who died." Cindy attends Cindy went to the local hospital, intending to visit Martina, who was recovering from a previous attack. However, upon crossing the threshold into the central corridor, she encountered Cindy. She suffers a severe psychotic episode due to her past traumas and comes face to face with her ex-boyfriend Bobby, who stares at her with a macabre smile and imperturbable, seized by panic and fury. Cindy grabs a metal chamber pot she finds and delivers a monumental beating to his head, smashing the object in her face, only blink a second later and discover the harsh reality. Bobby was never there. She is completely alone. While this is happening in another wing of the building, Martina rests on her cot, trying to relax as she turns on the television. On the screen, the exclusive trailer for a new and infamous biopic about Jermaine Jackson, Michael Jackson's brother, has begun playing, starring a mediocre actor named Marine. The project director is yelling furiously at him from behind the cameras, complaining that he doesn't look like himself, nothing to the king of pop, who has a dreadful voice, badly dyed hair, and to top it all off, Michael had a chimpanzee as a pet, while this guy is parading around ridiculously with an Andean llama. The imitator ignores the complaints, shows off his llama, and, while attempting to exaggerate the classic dance steps, he ends up losing his balance and rolling around in a pitiful and noisy manner down the set stairs. Right at that moment in the broadcast, the hospital suddenly goes into red alert. The main lights in the room flicker until they go out completely, and from the shadows of the medical corridors emerges the iconic silhouette of Ghostface, ready to finish off Martina. In the midst of the struggle and desperation, the girl trips and accidentally breaks the container's morphine from the medical wing, causing both her and the masked killer to inhale a massive dose of the chemical, unleashing a delirious chase and in slow motion through the corridors, where both of them stumble along, completely drugged, tripping over the gurneys. At the end of the corridor, trying to recreate the climax in Scream 5, Sarah, her boyfriend, and the clumsy Doofy appear to try and save the day. Doofy bravely stands up for himself. He confronts the killer to buy some time, but Ghostface recovers from his morphine trip and brutally executes him. However, as a final act with pride and rebellion, BLFY shoves his hand deep up his ass and rubs his dirty finger directly on the killer's mask. Ghostface, completely disgusted and outraged, he wipes his face and shouts, "What the hell was that?" To which Doofy replies, proud and agonized, that it was a finger that had been inserted into his anus minutes earlier. Right after this bizarre incident, a hospital nurse pokes her head through the door from the guardroom and, instead of being horrified by the corpse, glares at Ghostface and warns him in a bureaucratic tone that since it's during his regular work hours, he's going to have to clean up all that bloody mess on the floor himself. Finally leaving the hospital in a hurry, Cindy she meets with the young women, who reject her and call her crazy. Martina, fed up with the situation, stands in the middle of the street and starts shouting, desperately reaching for the sky, recreating the mythical and exaggerated scene from the first film. What are you waiting for? Cindy watches her with contemptuous. He interrupts the moment and criticizes her harshly, telling her that she is doing it terribly and without passion, proceeding to open his mouth to give him a live lesson in how to execute a real cinematic scream of terror that deafens the entire block. Furthermore, that same afternoon, Shorty leaves his house with the firm intention of clearing his mind and rolling a joint on the sidewalk. On his way, he crosses paths with a man. An African-American man runs terrified down the middle of the street in his underwear. It turns out he was fleeing from Ray, who had pursued him closely with a crazed look while shouting that he couldn't wait to catch him, making it quite clear that Ray was following exactly with the same old habits and inclinations after so many years. Upon returning home somewhat confused, Shorty is ambushed on the living room couch by Ghostface. Instead of stabbing him, pulls out a cup of tea and begins to question him casually. The killer seriously questions him about why he can't stop using those kinds of illegal substances, to which Shorty replies melancholically that it's humanly impossible for him due to a terrible trauma he has carried since childhood. In a flashback, Shorty remembers an extremely cold night from his childhood when he saw his mother with an unknown man was caught in a car during an intimate act. The problem was that when his mother experienced a massive squirt, she got out so much pressurized water inside the cabin that it completely drowned the poor man who was with her. Ghostface, moved by the story unfolds, but maintaining his villainous role, he uses his abilities to hypnotize him and orders him into a deep sleep. Upon waking him, a few seconds later, the killer brings the armchair to life and swallows Shorty whole, plunging him into a void that immediately transports him to a psychedelic space trip. In the middle of the cosmos, Shorty begins to fly alongside two other clones of himself, while in the background a direct parody of a K-pop song by the Girls of Demon Hunters or Hauntrix. In the music video, the Korean members appear wearing different colors of hair, but with identical faces. Suddenly regaining consciousness, Shorty wakes with a star in his bed, believing the entire trip intergalactic and K-pop was a product of severe hallucination. But when he lifts the covers, he discovers to his surprise that there are 3 real Korean girls lying next to him. Taking advantage of his tremendous popularity on the internet, Shorty starts a live stream on the Kick platform, announcing with great fanfare that internet megastar Kaisnat will be joining him that night on his broadcast, mistakenly assuming that it's all part from a special cameo appearance contracted for the horror movie they live in. Live on air and in front of thousands of online viewers, Ghostface, he appears behind them in a room and proposes a friendly interactive activity. The classic game of guessing who hits you from behind while wearing a closed helmet. They start dancing and having fun in front of the webcam. But when it's Ghostface's turn to hit, he pulls out a machete and cleanly cuts him, the head to Kaisnat live. Far from being scared or cutting the broadcast due to the horror of the murder, Shorty gets excited seeing the viewer count climb. He starts celebrating in front of the screen, assuring everyone that with that level of sensationalism in a live broadcast, they're going to rake in millions of dollars on the platform. As chaos spreads, local authorities try to do their job in an extremely difficult way. Inefficient. At the bus stop near the crime scene, a sinister butler dressed exactly in the eerie style of the movie Long, a lawyer walking suspiciously. The local police patrol quickly spots him on the sidewalk, but in an act of pure and systematic institutional racism, officers completely ignore the obvious suspect and forcibly arrest an African-American man, innocent bystander, who was standing right next to him waiting for transport. Obsessed with the idea of looking younger and younger, so as not to lose relevance with new digital audiences, the reporter decides to go that same afternoon to a clandestine aesthetic clinic of dubious reputation located in a basement. The surgeons in charge offer him an experimental rejuvenating serum that promises to erase 30 years from his appearance in seconds. But before they can after administering the first injection, Ghostface emerges from the lab lockers, brutally murders the doctors, and proceeds to inject liters of blood into him, liters of the chemical directly into the woman's bloodstream. The chemical violently alters and deforms the structure cell phone on her body that when she wipes the bathroom mirror to see the results, the reporter discovers with horror that skin has sprouted from her back and Tiffany's face just before Ghostface finishes her off with stabs on the ground, directly telling the camera that it's time to stop. These kinds of absurd movies exist because the industry isn't going to give fans a legitimate sequel, no matter how much they insist. The long-awaited sequel has finally arrived. Halloween night arrives, and the big costume party at the main residence officially kicks off. Brenda decides to attend the event rebelliously and without no kind of disguise, while his partner Ray arrives at the place dressed in Old West cowboy attire. At the same time, Shorty searches the kitchen desperately for his special magic sweets that he had stored in the cupboard. Discovering Brenda was horrified to learn that she had mistakenly given them all away to the neighborhood children who had come trick-or-treating early that morning. Upon learning of the enormous amount of prohibited substances that the children have just consumed, the scene moves to the street, where the children flee at full speed to the sidewalks, emulating the dramatic tracking shot from the film Anatomy of a Fall. The little ones run wildly with their arms outstretched toward the back, like characters from Naruto, shouting at the top of their lungs that the crap they were given was great. Meanwhile, Brenda's daughter is returning to the party after actively participating in an ideological march downtown. The subway car on a return trip encounters a passenger dressed as the Megan doll, who out of nowhere begins to perform his characteristic and unsettling routine. She danced on social media before revealing herself to be Ghostface and stabbing her in the abdomen. The young woman fell to the ground screaming desperately for help. Humanitarian. A woman traveling in the same car quickly approaches to help her. The victim interrupts the rude emergency maneuver to rudely demand that she respect her inclusive pronouns, clarifying that it is not she, but they. Fed up with the situation and their obnoxious attitude, all the passengers on the subway lose patience, pull out their own knives, and they form an orderly line to cheerfully cooperate in their mass execution inside the train car. Back at the residence, Sarah, Martina, and the boyfriend they knock insistently on the front door, explaining that they have come with the sole intention of joining the celebration, playing good music in the stereo, and do some activities that qualify as semi-gay. This immediately awakens Ray's curiosity, who peeks through the window, questioning suspiciously why the hell they specify that he's only half gay and not completely. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms behind the house, Shorty is intently rolling a giant joint when his nephew Brad approaches him for love advice. First, he gently shapes it, then moistens it with saliva, and finally lights it with fire. Try putting the advice into practice literally, and he immediately confronts his partner in the hallway, but everything goes terribly wrong when he uses a real lighter, ending up burning the girl's private parts and unleashing her fury. Meanwhile, Brenda's son looks for his girlfriend in the backyard to apologize for a previous argument, but is ambushed by Ghostface in the darkness. The killer pulls out a leather whip and begins to lash him. The young man stops the attack by reporting the act, immediately as a highly racist hate crime due to the history of their community. With no other viable options in their repertoire and completely fed up with the social debate, Ghostface pulls a modern firearm from his robes and coldly declares that he will now act exactly like the modern police officers, ending the young man's life with a single shot to the chest. Shorty remains completely engrossed in his screen, playing a game. Stars playing video games in her living room when Ghostface appears from behind, knife raised. Shorty decides to help him a smoke trap, completely drugging the killer with a high-potency joint and consuming some with him. Cindy frantically calls her daughter's phone, urging her to be extremely careful, while she completely adopts her daughter's personality and style. John Wick's visual style. He dyes his hair dark in a second, steals a sports car at gunpoint, and drives at full speed, speeding toward the others. Arriving skidding at the crime scene, Sarah discovers a terrible and twisted truth in the middle of the room. Brenda's son's girlfriend, Lena, is actually one of the criminal masterminds hiding behind the Ghostface mask. The villain pulls out a gun and opens fire indiscriminately on the group, forcing everyone to run for cover behind the furniture. Amid the bullets, Brenda ironically warns Cindy to watch her head, sarcastically commenting that seeing a white person unleashing a mass shooting in a private property is perfectly normal in today's society. The deranged Lena takes advantage of the distraction and shoots him directly in the chest. Brenda, who falls dramatically to the ground, proclaiming her tragic death with her last ounce of strength. Cindy, completely devastated by the loss from her best friend, she immediately proceeds to put Brenda in a black plastic body bag with a zipper. although in reality Brenda was only blatantly faking her death to stop them from shooting her and to save herself. Cindy, armed with courage and in a pure state of fury, he enters the property in search of the rest of the attackers. He begins firing blindly through the walls and doors of wood, accidentally destroying Shorty's favorite glass pipe and accidentally shooting Sarah's boyfriend in the arm due to poor aim. The main Ghostface appears to confront her in hand-to-hand combat, but out of nowhere the room fills with smoke and multiple ghosts emerge. Identical copies of the killer are all over the house. Cindy nimbly manages to defeat them one by one in martial arts choreography, and having run completely out of ammunition in their firearms, they continue the massacre using 2 gigantic rubber dildos as weapons forcefully, driving them hard into the killer's buttocks and mouths until they were unconscious. In that climax of revelations, Lena confesses on her knees that her one and only pathetic motive for starting the killing spree was to forcibly revive a franchise of cinematic horror genre that was already completely dead and buried in theaters. Sarah's boyfriend, showing his true treacherous nature in that moment. He is also revealed as the second official accomplice and stabs his partner in the back to tie up any loose ends. However, the plot of the film takes an even more twisted turn when 2 more surprise ghost faces appear at the crime scene, who, without saying a word, betray and they brutally murder both the demented Lena and the traitorous boyfriend. We discover with astonishment that the true masterminds and culprits behind the entire mass killing that night were Shorty and Ray. They both confess resentment that they meticulously planned this entire horror scenario, because right from commercial release of Scary Movie 3, their original characters from pop culture were cruelly sidelined by Hollywood producers, so they returned after years of absence to exact a bloody revenge and reclaim what is rightfully theirs. To stretch out the absurd joke, Anthony Anderson and Shockwell O'Higgins enter the scene, but the discussion is short-lived, as both end up being executed mid-conversation. With only Cindy, Brenda, Shorty, Ray, and the surviving daughters left alive amidst the carnage, all the veterans decide to put the past conflict behind them and reunite because, in their own meta-referential words, they cannot imagine a Halloween movie without Jamie Lee Curtis or a Scream saga without Nick Campbell, because when they try to do it without the Queen's originals, end up making a tremendous mess of things, like what happened in Scream 6. However, the logistical dilemma arises of how to name the new A group of survivors for the upcoming sequels. Cindy's ungrateful daughters break the family truce by insulting them directly to their faces and suggesting in a mocking tone that the new team should be called the Old Folks or the Club of the Crepitos Elderly. This terrible insult to their legacy unleashes the unanimous fury of the 4 original veterans from the 2000s. So without a second thought, the group of 4 adults lock the surviving young men and daughters inside the rooms of the wooden house and proceed to set the entire house on fire property using gasoline. The film concludes epically with the 4 original survivors,